The Cloudcast is sponsored by Intel Cloud for All, driving the creation of tens of thousands of clouds.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast, coming to you live from Raleigh, North Carolina, here in the massive studios. Today, just me, but not really just me. We're doing a show, partially because every one of you guys always want us to do a show on the weekend, so you have something to listen to while you're mowing the grass or doing whatever chores you have. But Aaron and I felt bad because we screwed up the last show. It did this really weird audio thing, and so we said, all right, we have to get another show out the door. Now, here's the challenge. Aaron's not available. So I went and got the next best option, and actually probably a better option. Sorry, Aaron, you made a better option than me too. So Amy Lewis, welcome back to the show. It's been a very long time since you've been on the show.
Hi, Brian. How are you doing?
I'm good. Welcome back to the show. I'm trying to think when the last time was you were on, because as another good North Carolina person, we like to have as many on as possible. And you've been busy and off doing lots of other things. You're like the queen of your own podcast, and then you're sort of the on everybody else's podcast. You're like the Goldie Hawn of podcasts or something like that. Whoever comes on late night all the time, that's you.
or the Yoko Ono of podcasts.
What are you destroying or enhancing, however you want to look at it?
Yeah, eyes on you, Greg Neerman. It's the running joke of I think it's because I'm available on Monday nights. Basically, I end up on Speaking in Tech as their random third person if nobody else says yes. Okay. But yeah, been running around the country a bit. Going to spend a lot of time in Vegas this year after avoiding it completely in 2015. So just a little point of pride there. No Vegas in 2015. Yeah,
that's the unfortunate part of Moscone Center being closed down for the year is things are moving to Vegas, which just the week that never ends. It's just Groundhog's Day every time. Doesn't matter what the event is. It's all exactly the same, whether it's Interop, EMC World, VM World, whatever, it's just exactly the same. So yeah, I think I'm in Vegas maybe like half dozen times this year, which is not fun. Anyways, so what I thought we would do, and we're gonna kind of record this, but you and I do this all the time, is we just sort of riff on stuff that's obviously between Speaking in Tech and Geek-Whisperers you get a pretty interesting perspective on stuff. We get a little different kind of different perspective on stuff on our show because we do a lot of the startups and stuff. And I thought we could riff on a bunch of topics that are sort of, floating around in my brain. And I know you and I have talked about them a little bit. So I'm going to start off with this, and we may end up doing a whole bunch of topics, and we may end up doing one topic depending on where this one goes.
Well, I was going to say, Brian, usually we like to do this with chicken and waffles in front of us. So I hope that's going to be part of the show notes, or at least a picture on the blog. Yeah. No. So yeah, usually this ends up being something we do over lunch. That'll be like a 20-minute planned thing, and it goes on to be 2 hours or something. So we're gonna keep this on the normal 30-minute schedule though. So here's my rant or riff or whatever, and I want to get your take on it. So I sort of have this thesis that right now, or at least over the last year or so, but right now we're sort of at the peak of this. The IT industry is probably in a more chaotic state than it's ever been. And I say that from the perspective of, having been in it for 20 something odd years now, and lots of stuff has changed, but it feels like it's really, really chaotic. Like there really are, kind of no rules anymore. The rules are all getting rewritten and reshuffled around. And off the top of your head, what's your take on that? Yeah, I certainly don't have the history with tech that you do. Not saying you're a dinosaur or anything. Just kidding. I just haven't been in the industry as long. But in terms of the marketplace in general, and just thinking about the place of technology and the worldwide economy, et cetera. So I do actually think that's true. And this is going to sound strange, but as we've talked through it, I almost think that we're more chaotic than we've ever been because we haven't had a major market correction lately. Yeah. Which may sound funny, but it's almost like to take a page out of nature. of course, we all dread here on the Eastern Coast, we all dread hurricane season.
Right.
But if you don't have a couple of corrective hurricanes, then you get a lot of beach debris. And you kind of have mild chaos at all times. Like you have shark infestations and jellyfish landing and all these crazy stories. And it sounds like a strange thing to say, but in some ways you almost need one big sharp correction sometimes to get everything back. And I think because we haven't had that, do you feel that way? It's like we keep threatening this is going to change. This is the year of the cloud, of VDI, of this, of that, the other. And we have lots of small market corrections and shifts in the industry, but we haven't had, my reference point, we haven't had that dot bomb moment where everything really is upended.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. I think, we had one in 2001-ish, 2001, 2002. We had another one around 8 or 9, probably 2009. So you had about a 7 or 8 year thing. I think that's partially what's got people a little bit worried. Forget about all the, massively valued unicorns, whether they're massively valued or overvalued or whatever. There's a little feeling of like, it's been 7 or 8 years. Are we due for another one of these things that sort of corrects stuff?
It's a little bit doomsday-ish maybe, but I mean, some of the signs and signals are there. And in some ways, it's one of the most exciting things about our industry is that you don't know what's going to change things in ways you can't even imagine.
Right.
So we think about the various things that have transformed the industry, and I think we can fairly say that. I do think it's the march of the drumbeat of software. So the relative importance of hardware and infrastructure, I think, is changing. I'm not going to be one of those death knell people that say, it's got to run on
whatever
something.
It is dead. Yeah.
Right. But I think the bias towards software or hardware is slowly shifting, and I think markets have tried to drive that and saying, oh, this is what customers want. But we know there's some market-driven stuff, some market-led stuff. I think we really are finally starting to see some of that transition. Some of the conversations we're hearing up and down the stack, that really has changed in terms of, I think back to a few years ago, my time at Cisco, when the shot heard around the world was, if you don't know something about programming, you're not going to have a job in 2 years. And I think that has shifted from this sort of threatening tactic to an acceptance that people want that to be part of their job. People are ready to offload some of the redundant tasks and move on to some other ways of thinking, being, et cetera. And again, it doesn't dismiss the role of hardware in all of this, because software has to run on something.
Right.
And I think people seem to forget there is a relationship there but I do think the importance has shifted. And I think the fear factor has changed, meaning that people are a bit less resistant to this concept.
Right. Yeah, I think what always gets me is I feel like we're sort of at the end of this 20-year cycle. So, I think about like 01 and 02, you had this really long period of time. You had 4 or 5 years where it felt like there was very little competition in the industry. Like the people who kind of made it out of it with a lot of money didn't have a whole lot of competition. Like I'll put Cisco in perspective because I was there. You were joining a little later than that. But I mean, like they literally kind of turned on themselves because there was nobody else in the industry to compete against. But they didn't change themselves at all. Like they came out of that last one as a very hardware centric company. I think about my career and I put it kind of in this perspective, almost everybody I know, or at least knew up until the last few years of doing the podcast, their world was basically looked like this. There was vendors who built things. There was, VARs and SIs who kind of delivered it. You could be at a customer, and then, what you bought sort of fit in a swim lane. So you bought databases from a certain company, you bought networking from a certain company, you bought software from a certain company. And I feel like those things are kind of gone at this point. There's still vendors, obviously, but there's open source and there's clouds, right? So there's alternatives to vendors. People talk about like things like shadow IT and so forth, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Like it's easier to get access to technology now. So you could be a developer, you could be a project manager, you could be whatever. And I feel like those rules that we all sort of lived by and that ecosystem, part of it's still there, but part of it's really, really blurry. And what the new thing will end up looking like feels like it's really undefined at this point. And that's the thing that I get from people all the time, asking about careers and jobs and what to study next is it's hard to give them any advice when you're not sure what the landscape's going to look like, right? It's sort of run over that, it's like being a military commander or something and going, hey, run over that hill and just start shooting. I'm not sure what you're going to see over the top of that hill, but just start shooting because there's a chance that it could be the bad guy. But keep your eyes out. It could be it could be a villager as well. But I just need you to kind of run over that hill and just trust me on this one. And it feels a little bit like people are like, yeah, I don't know about that, man. But I don't know any better to not run over the hill.
I think that's true. I mean, as I think culturally, we all just want to move forward. And it's funny, I'm thinking about your this concept of these nice, safe swim lanes. And as much as we wanted to, I think about my parents' generation. And for them, I haven't had that many different jobs in my life compared to a lot of people. But to them, it's just insanity, right? Because they came from an era of you went to one company and you retired from that company and you got the pension from that company.
Right.
And so that transition, it may seem like ancient history to some of your listeners, but it doesn't feel like we've been in that shift that long, right? For our generation to be, we're looked at as regular job hoppers to that one generation back, much less this modern generation, which is much more in that rent the job versus own it forever kind of concept. It's about developing the skills and like you said, publicly transitioning between roles, trying to figure that out, creating new ones. And so the swim lanes have gotten incredibly messy in that same way. What was once a very structured and organized system, and we all kind of agreed to it, is a little bit of chaos theory. And I don't think it's a bad thing, but it's something we're all accustomed to now, that the next Stanford dropout could write the 3 lines of code that eliminates an entire job function.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is kind of mind blowing. And the speed at which that can happen, I think, is the other big difference.
Right.
Where that might have taken 5-10 years to get in production, like you said, with everybody having more access and everybody being at least a hobbyist technologist. Very few are in the trenches and can speak at the level at that enterprise and extreme, run business, run true infrastructure level. But everyone's a little bit of a hobbyist, and it changes the demand.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's, I remember when I first started managing people, I had folks who would come up to me and go like, hey, what's my career path? And I understand the ask, if, like you had said, your parents had worked for one company or one industry or, been in one city their whole life or something. And that's what you had seen, right? It's the classic, lots of kids whose parents are doctors or lawyers become doctors or lawyers because that's what they see in the household, or they become a cop, or they become, whatever they, and I made a comment on Twitter the other day. Somebody was asking about career paths or something like that. And I think I said, there are no more career paths, at least in the technology world. There are no more career paths. There's really just, a couple of year projects, 2 or 3 year sort of projects or a focus area. Or you can go off and go do your own thing. And it kind of, I think it ruffled some feathers with people, but I think about, the people that we work with in our industry, and maybe we're biased because we tend to be on the sell side of things as opposed to the buying side of things. But, I think that sort of has become the new normal, in that, you can't be sure that they won't want to outsource your job, offshore your job, move your job somewhere else. It becomes sort of a natural defense mechanism that you should be sort of looking every couple of years. I
think it's actually, I may hazard a guess, it's even a little bit more chaotic on the buy side, because when we interview people, and again, my Geek-Whisperers hat firmly on here, there is a lot of trepidation. I think you're right. I think that was actually me on Twitter about the job roles and evolution, because we had a really kind of open discussion about, is tech evangelism dead? Is that role dead? What does this look like? I think some of the more coveted roles, the more interesting aspects are harder to get. They're not as long lasting. It's evolving very quickly. And again, that is still the sell side of the market. On the buy side, though, I do think there's even slightly more vulnerability, or at least fear of vulnerability. That concept of things being eliminated by a single script or being shipped overseas.
Yep.
Sort of the two classic things we hear about, at least in the U.S. This mysterious overseas is kind of, the world's a universal place more and more so. So I think that language disappears more and more, but that at least the function will be regrouped and put with a cheaper set of resources, or pooled, or done kind of Henry Ford, some sort of a assembly line style.
Yeah.
So, and maybe we all just kind of live with this anxiety, whereas we didn't think about it as much anymore. We didn't think about it as much.
Yeah, I think you sort of highlighted it early on, right? This software concept, right? Software becoming this kind of dominant force in our industry, or more so than it was before. Like, I think I know a lot of people. We talk all the time about, you need to become a programmer. You need to learn programming. You need to figure these things out. I used to deal with a lot of technology. I had a CCIE. I bounced around new technologies all the time. It felt like back in the day, if you were in some domain, learning something new wasn't super, super hard. Like, it was like, okay, well, this thing feels like the other thing. It's got a different interface or whatever. I feel like the programming thing, if you don't have any programming background, I think the assumption that people can learn how to program is really a stretch. I don't know, it's like those first 5 or 6 steps are so difficult for people, and there's no kind of easy way to get there. And that's the crazy thing. There is a million easy ways to get there. There's a million things online, but finding somebody to sort of hold your hand to help you get there, if that's where you want to get to, I feel like that one of the biggest feedbacks I get from people is that's really, really hard.
And I think that's exactly, it's liken it to any language you learn. The level between being able to order a taco and fluency to have a conversation is vast. And so I think everybody can dabble, and I would encourage, and we often do encourage, one should get at least some, I don't expect full fluency for any of us if that's, like you said, not your path or your focus, or you really don't devote time to it, but some just basic literacy I think is really important. Because I think that is where the next step is. So if you can't even use the same terms, then I think that's going to be pretty job limiting. Yeah.
You've got to be able to order more than 2 beers and find the bathroom if that's that's where your next job's going. All right. So let's talk about something that's kind of near and dear to our hearts. We talk about all the time. Let's talk a little bit about the location. You mentioned a second ago, hey, IT's this global world. We live in this global space, but yet for whatever reason, location matters still in our industry, which is really kind of crazy because we're one of the industries that creates all this technology that sort of makes it so that you can be not having to be in the room, but yet our industry, 10 years ago, teleworking was like a big deal. It was going to save the planet, lots of no driving and all these things. And it feels like we've kind of gone back to the, Silicon Valley, San Francisco centric thing again. I don't want remote workers. I don't want, I want to do things. Every event is in San Francisco. Every event's on California time zone. Do you get that sense at all? Or is that just us being too sensitive to it because we're not there?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I think there's truth and myth in there, as with most good arguments. I think that there are jobs for people who don't live in Silicon Valley, and I think there's great value to dispersing and hiring where the talent is. I say this as a manager of an almost 100% distributed team. So practically nobody I work with works in headquarters, or very few. So it doesn't create imbalance in the team. which is important because I think if you have a team where 10 people sit in one place and one sits somewhere else, that's complicated. But when you're all distributed, then the playing field is the same for everybody.
Right.
So I think that's one thing, right? And the second thing is, let's separate again between selling side and buying side, because industry happens all over the world and not just in the place where maybe people feel like technology emanates from. And that is an interesting perspective too, because I think if you do very customer-centric things, if that's your focus, and that is in my individual contributor self, I'm pretty focused on that end customer. I think not being inside that bubble is actually a real asset. And I think it's just it does always depend on the company. I have been a teleworker accidentally for almost my entire career. Because even when I was in publishing, I was remote from the New York office and working here from North Carolina. So it has forced me to develop a set of skills that may speak to the job that I have now, because I have to know how to connect with people across communications channels that are perhaps atraditional. And I have to find a way to get water cooler information when it's a virtual water cooler.
Yeah.
So I think there is a truth and a not truth. I think it's always you have to push against it, because gravity wants to pull everybody in one place. As much as, like you said, telework saves the world, people value getting together. What I think we have to change is the definition of what that looks like, how often that's necessary, and how we manage teams optimally. Some work probably is best done in that 9-to-5 all-in-one space setting. But yep. I think there's a lot of other alternative types that work really well distributed. But I think if you're distributed, you have to think about how to make that work within the team. Make sure you don't have that one person, that odd person out, and right. have endless meetings at 5:00, Eastern, whenever that seems totally fine if you're sitting in San Francisco.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's a couple things there that'll be interesting to watch. So, we talked about, hey, will there be some sort of correction that'll happen? Who knows? One correction I feel like sort of has to happen at some point is, you have all these startups out in the Bay Area, especially out in San Francisco. The Bay, the Silicon Valley tends to be a little more hardware centric, but the software guys in San Francisco, huge valuations, not necessarily making money, but what's happened is, the housing prices in San Francisco are insane, not like partially insane, like ridiculously insane, to the point where I feel like that little thing could burst and start to force some people. Like there was a meme the other week or so that was like, people would sort of create some haiku, and the end of every one of them was like, and you must relocate to San Francisco. Roses are red, violets are blue. You must relocate to San Francisco. And like, I can't see how the industry sustains people living in $5,000 a month, 1 bedroom, 700 square foot apartments. Like that just doesn't, like there is so much talent outside of there. And I can't see why anybody would necessarily want to move there, other than the next enormous payday, which, if things sort of get south, then the payday bonanza, potentially gets stretched out another 4 or 5 years or something. So that to me is going to be interesting. The other thing, I used to kick this around when I was in MBA school, because we were talking about different projects, and the analogy we would always use is like, when movies get made, they bring together these sets of people for a very short period of time, 3 or 4 weeks or something, film crews and stunt crews and all these sort of things. And then they go away, but they've orchestrated it such that whenever they need to do a movie, they kind of, call out to these people who are all independent contractors for the most place, bring them together, they work together, then they disband. And I'm waiting to see if companies ever start moving towards that model, if there becomes enough kind of independent skill sets, right? That somebody can coordinate together for a product launch, for this, for that, the other. But if there's enough people doing it on these sort of shifted time schedules where they sort of overlap at times and so forth, like, will we eventually see that start to happen? Or does everything always end up having to be a, one person, one job, one type of function?
Well, this may be my pioneer self talking, but But I feel like this works really well when it's allowed to come forth organically.
Yep.
And the minute you move it to settler and town planner mode, the minute you try to make it programmatic, you kill it. And so I think that because I do think that people are more comfortable with swim lanes and org charts and things that are fixed. And when you cross those streams, number one, like you said, when it works well, brilliant work happens because you are getting people who volunteer to break the rules for a common end goal and do it well and communicate with each other, coordinate. So I think there's something I look forward to the day when that's more the norm and when people stop trying to put it in a bottle and repeat the process.
Yeah.
You know, with how do you do a QBR on the ultimate dotted line kind of organizational thing? It's in some ways it's like community, right? Community swells up around a particular problem, need, etc. And it does benefit from some program management and some regularity. But I think when you try to study it to death, then you kill the very spirit and the thing that it was meant to solve or do.
Yeah. It just becomes the faceless, soulless consultants of the world coming in and trying to replicate your problem like they did some other place. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. You see these sort of packs of people that float around, and it's not just a Silicon Valley thing. It happens at every company, but so-and-so leaves and then so-and-so follows them and follows, and like, it's like, oh yeah, I've worked with so-and-so at that place. And then we all work together at this place. And like, I wonder if those start becoming independent entities and somebody goes, I need somebody who's really good at this, and they can bring the whole team in and they'll do it for a while. But you're probably right. If you don't know the kind of culture and soul of the company, that's a hard thing to do if you're going to do it for a while and then get in and out.
Well, one other, marauding bands of full-timers, short-time full-timers, right?
Yeah.
I kind of like the concept, actually.
Well, if I think about it, if I stretch it out a little bit, I mean, it's essentially what Cisco got into doing there for a while of continuing to have the same group of people spin out, do something cool, spin back in, do it as long as they thought it was fun, spin back, and it creates some very interesting morale situations that may be good or may not be good.
Well, it really does kind of speak to that pioneer settler, town planner. It depending on what people's energy is, it can create a lot of tension between different work styles for sure.
Right.
So one other observation, I can't help. It's a little navel gazy, but on the concept of Silicon Valley versus outside, have you ever noticed that a good number of the tech podcasts that get mentioned on the various top 10 tech podcasts to listen to list, et cetera, very few of them are hosted or centralized around Silicon Valley?
Yeah, no, that is a very good point. That was the weirdest moment I think that Aaron and I had, was when the people from Silicon Valley would reach out to us and say, we know about you guys. Can we come on your show? Or we listen? Or, I mean, like, it was this really weird moment of sort of being like, how do I phrase this? Like, when I go to San Francisco, my Meetup application explodes and goes like, hey, there's Meetup here. Like, there'll be a dozen every single day. And you go, man, if I lived out here, I would be so in the know of what's going on. Like, I could go to an event anytime I want to, and this and the other. And yeah, you're right. It is kind of weird that they tend to tune into these things. And maybe it's maybe it's hey, I need to know what's going on outside the bubble thing.
Well, here's my theory.
Okay.
Is that you nail, and actually the example is perfect. So if you've got, it's an embarrassment of riches. So I think when you're there and it's easy, that people don't necessarily have to stretch the muscles as much. And I know for myself, at least, podcasting and engaging is a way to stay engaged that I might not have to do if it was just there in my backyard. Yeah. So it's almost like you have to do the extra credit assignment just to keep on average with the rest of the class. So just something I'm tossing out there. I've noticed before that a lot of evangelists or podcasters or community leaders pop up outside of the center zones. And I think it's that drive to, work harder to make the cut in some ways.
Yeah, I think the rest of us all sort of have middle child syndrome. Like, without being middle child, like, you have to be much louder if you're not, you're not the oldest, you're not the youngest. You're right. You have to be a little more scrappy or a little more willing to make some noise to get attention. So let me ask one last question, because we'll wrap it up from a timing perspective. Let's see. Any recommendation? So you guys get a chance to talk to a lot of people, kind of what they're doing with their career, what they're interested in. I'll leave it open ended. Either give me an example of somebody who, you'd point to and you'd go, that person is doing a very, very cool thing in terms of dealing with transitions and trying to, stake a place out there, or just sort of any recommendation you've got on something that's helping you a whole lot, kind of wrap your brain around some of this chaos.
A whole lot of things. Actually, you introduced me to my new favorite podcast, which is the A16Z podcast.
Yep, like that one a lot.
And they're thought provoking. They cover a wide gamut of topics. But really talking about transformation. And one of my favorite ones was this simple concept about disruption. And they said, basically, when you've created enough of an audience base that you've got a competitor, you've succeeded, but you're also going to have to fight differently because you've created a marketplace, basically, and you've created your own competition. And it's such an interesting listen, and you can see it pop up as a truth over and over again. I think that's one of my favorite ways to kind of address and deal with the chaos, is acknowledging that it always exists, and you have to look at it not as failure, but as success. That as we make things choppy, it is a little anxiety inducing for sure when you don't know which hill to run over or what's going to be the next thing. But I think very few people choose technology so that they can sit still and stop. Yeah. It's not that sort of industry. And there are a million hobbies or other industries or other ways to provide that need for extreme stability if one needs that as balance. But I think to participate in this industry is you have to find a way, which sounds very Zen-like, but I think you have to find a way to appreciate and embrace the chaos. And so the other thing that we learned for sure on the Geek-Whisperers, we sort of joke like we could almost have one thing that every single guest comes up with is this curiosity, is find a way to feed your curiosity. And if it's a matter of disciplining yourself to find that extra time in the day, or my favorite one of, stop doing something so you can start doing something else, or whatever it is, but find the time to listen to the podcast, to read that extra blog, to go to that meetup. Whether you live in the Valley or not, like find that time to go do that thing that's not directly in line with your job. And we hear that a lot too. Some of our favorite guests have said, prepare yourself. You don't know when you're building for the skills for the next thing. So find the time and make that preparation and pursue it actively. So instead of running from the chaos, it is run toward it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. I think I'll give one plug. There's a new podcast I've been listening to just recently. It's called Exponent, EXPONET. It's a little bit long form, so they tend to run a little more than an hour, but really a good. Two guys talking about, no guests. It's usually just two guys on one topic, and talking about kind of one of these, big transformational issues. Should you care about the Tesla stuff? What is some of the things going on with Apple and Google mean? And they're not entirely super like highbrow. They kind of get into it. It's a very nice mix of like technology and business. So I'll recommend that one. I think to kind of to hit on your point, and we probably should just do an entire show on this at some point of people's hobbies turned into something. I'll give a plug for a guy who's been on our show before named Jason Edelman. Jason basically was, working as an SE in the field for a VAR, kind of got interested in, some of the automation technology and has turned that into his full-time job, was doing it as a hobby, was playing around with it, found some people in the community that would help him with some things. And he's got some stuff coming up that we'll probably end up doing a show on. But, he is a really good example of, take something that you're interested in, see if you can turn it into something that you're passionate about. And sometimes you find that, once you reach that point where you're passionate about it, that, it's a skill or a good or a service that people are willing to pay you for. And in some cases that might become your new thing. So yeah, no, I totally agree with you. You have to put in the hours for it. It can be hard at points in time because it's learning something new or it's taking away from time with your family. But it's good to have that sort of plan B somewhere in your plans for what you're doing. So,
well, I always say you taught me that one. And even just today in a conversation, it came up where people always, how do I become influential? People want the easy button, right?
Right.
And you told me that way back when. It's you gotta put in the hours. There's no other thing but repetition. And I love Jason's story too for that same thing. I think 9 times out of 10 when we kind of live inside this anxiety, this is on my mind because the Geek-Whisperers, again, talk about this all the time. We're not giving ourselves permission to see that change isn't bad and that we could do something else. And we have, there's just so many stories. There's so many positive stories I think we could point to. We tend to focus on the negative, but maybe we should focus on the evolution, the successes. And I think there's something to be learned in those.
Yep. No, absolutely. And, all right. Very cool. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. It's been a long time. It's fun to sort of get some of these conversations out there. I suspect we'll strike up some side conversations, but thank you for coming back on again. We need to do this again very soon. Where can everybody find all the good things you're doing out there on the inner tubes?
Oh, well, I am on the Twitters all the time at Comms Ninja. And you can find our podcast, The Geek-Whisperers, we talked about, at Geek_Whisperers, or the website, obviously geek-whispers.com. And assuming this comes out, the podcast comes out really quickly, we are going to be at the Silicon Valley VMUG in person, all three of us, basically running the Lucy Van Pelt Peanuts style, come and talk to us about your career at the VMUG. So it's the three of us haven't had the opportunity to do something like that. So we're going to sit down and talk to people in the community who feel stuck or trapped in their job. And this is Tuesday, April 12th.
Cool.
So
and that costs a nickel.
I'm hoping to collect a lot of nickels, and I'm also going to be moderating a Tech Pioneers panel. So we'll be digging into some of these same questions. So I appreciate the inspiration. I'm going to take some of these questions.
Good. Will you be pulling the football away from anybody who comes and asks difficult questions?
Well, I do have naturally curly red hair, which is another major theme of Charles Schultz's, which may speak to why I love him as a cartoonist. So yes. Good deal. If you're out in the valley, go check those guys out, John and Matt and obviously Amy. Always keep it fun and do an awesome job. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks to Amy, and Aaron will be back next week. Folks, we will talk to you next week. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.